Hello and welcome to the next lesson about materials in Corona and VrayMtl. This time we'll discuss CoronaPhysicalMaterial and VrayMtl, so you'll be able to create similar results in both render engines. Let's start from Corona renderer and let's talk about the CoronaPhysicalMaterial. So first of all, CoronaPhysicalMaterial is a more natural way to set up realistic materials than in the previous versions of the Corona with the old Corona material. With CoronaPhysicalMaterial, importing materials from softwares like Quixel or Substance is easier and more accurate. And finally, you cannot create unrealistic materials because some of the options are disabled if they cannot be used. I've prepared a simple scene with some sculptures, so we can easily see the material's characteristics. I've applied the default CoronaPhysicalMaterial to all objects. Let's start interactive rendering. Here we go. Now, if you want to use the old Corona material, you still can, but in Corona 7 it changed its name to Corona Legacy material. So you can see that it's exactly the same as it was. So we have this basic options panel with new options. I show you a couple of materials. So let's start with aluminum brushed. Let's try brass brushed. Nice. Maybe some copper. Let's see gold yellow. At the end, some plastic. It's a cool option to have such presets, isn't it? Okay, now let me show you the same in VrayMtl. So the equivalent of CoronaPhysicalMaterial here is VrayMtl. I applied this material to all objects except for the background. We also have a basic parameters panel, which is quite similar to the one in Corona. And we also have presets available here. They are not exactly the same, but most of them are repeated. Now it's default, so it's a standard gray material. But we also have aluminum brushed here. We have gold materials as well. We can choose copper, for instance. And the last one, plastic. We can of course adjust these presets. We can, for example, change the color of the plastic. We can set something similar to what we have in Corona. Anyway, let's go back to the Corona scene. Let's go back to default, and I will start explaining everything step by step. First of all, we have a new option, metalness. We can choose if the material is non-metal or metal. We can start with metal first. So we have this base layer panel. We have level and color, and this works the same as before. 1 means 100 of color. The difference is that now, color in metal materials defines color of reflections, so we don't have to worry about setting a diffuse color of metal. We only control a reflection color, so we can make them darker or brighter. We cannot see sharp reflections because we have roughness value set up to 0.75, which means that our reflections are quite blurred. In general, roughness controls the smoothness of the base layer surface. The value 0 gives a completely smooth surface, which gives sharp reflections. So now, we can change the color of reflections so you can see how it works. Now, more towards the value 1, we create a rougher surface that causes more blurred reflections. So 1 is a completely rough surface. And again, we can control the color of reflections to achieve different results. We can use level, so 0 means 0% of color. We can of course choose colorful reflections as well. You can see that we have IR disabled. It's because it's metal, so the value is automatically set to really high value. We don't have to worry about it. and here as well. Let's go back to the default presets. You can see that in V-Ray we have a reflection panel, and we can change the reflection color and glossiness here. Now, if we go to the aluminum, you'll see that it has roughness instead of glossiness in the reflection panel. So it's now similar to Corona. You can see that if we scroll down to the BRDF panel, we can choose what we want to use. If we change it to roughness, we'll have roughness at the reflection panel. You can use both options, however, the values work the other way around. So 1 in roughness is like 0 in glossiness and vice versa. The same as in Corona, we have the metalness option. It controls the reflection model of the material from dielectric, value 0, to metallic, value 1. This parameter can be used with PBR setups coming from other applications. Let's leave the value 1 for now. We can change the roughness value. However, we need to change the color of the reflections first. So now you'll see the difference. 1 means a completely rough surface, while the value 0 gives a completely smooth surface, which gives sharp reflections. We can test different values. We can also change the diffuse color. We have additional roughness here as well. It's used to simulate rough surfaces or surfaces covered with dust, for example skin or the surface of the moon. Now we can control the reflection effect by changing the color. In V-Ray, we can additionally uncheck this and set the value we want. However, it's not really necessary. Let's go back to Corona to see what else we have. Then we have anisotropy of glossy reflection highlights. It's the same as before. So it determines the shape of the highlight. Transparency and refractions are disabled. Now, if we want to check the change of the same options in V-Ray, we need to scroll down to BRDF panel. And here we can notice the same options. We can test different values. Okay, let's go back to the default settings here, and let's go back to Corona and let's talk about the clear coat layer. The thing is that we don't have to separate glossiness for reflections and refractions. We have roughness, which influences both. So if we want to have glossy refractions and more sharp reflections, we can use clear coat for this. But we don't have any refractions now, so this clear coat layer can be useful if we want to create a protective layer over the paint that is used in cars, or a coat of varnish over wood. So to turn it on, we need to change the amount value to higher than 0. Here we go. We can choose an IRR that ranges from 1 to 3, so depending on the coat layer we create, we can change this value. Similarly, we have roughness and bump of the coat layer. We can control this amount to add more or less of this effect. We can also change the absorption color. So you can see that this gives more power than we had before using only one material. Okay, now in V-Ray, let's change the diffuse color. Let's make it something more similar to what we had in Corona. So you can see that we can easily adjust it. Now let's scroll down, and here we can see the code parameters panel. And here, similarly like in Corona, to make this option work, we need to have the value higher than 0. Now 1 means 100% of this code layer applied. We can of course separately control the roughness and IR of the code. We can also change its color. By changing this value, we can control how strong the effect of the code will be. We can make its reflection super sharp or more blurred. The same with IR. We can set separate IR values for this code. The same as in Corona, we can add a separate bump just for the code. Or we can take the one from the basic parameters panel. If we leave it as it's now, it will have no bump at all. Now let's go back to Corona. Okay, so now let's talk about the non-metal materials. Now, color is a diffuse color, not a reflection color like in the metal materials. Let's turn off the clear code layer by setting it up to 0. We can try different diffuse colors. I set something bluish. And roughness works the same. The higher the value, the more blurred the reflections. IR is from 1 to 3, as in real life for non-metallic materials. Bump, the same. We can add the noise map, for instance. I will copy it to the diffuse for a moment to set up the size. Okay, it can be like this. Let's unplug it from diffuse. Here we go. Works nice. Let's go back to the main material. I reset the anisotropy. We can set the refraction value. It's pretty straightforward. Opacity, displacement work the same. Now let's turn on clear code layer. Here, the same as we did in the metal material, we can change the parameters. We can make it more or less rough. We can control the amount of this effect. We can also have a separate bump to the code. Now, if we would like to do a clear glass, we just need to change the color, set roughness to 0, set refractions to 1, and we need to turn off the code layer. By increasing the roughness, we create frosted glass. Okay, so we can see that we have lots of control and it's easy to understand. Now, in V-Ray, let's turn off the code layer as well. So we want to create non-metallic material. We should change this value here. We can make sharp reflections, for instance. We can also control the diffuse color. Additionally, we can control the refraction by changing its color. Let's set it to white, for instance. So now, by changing the roughness value, I can control how sharp or how blurred the reflections are. We can also control refractions. If we want to have fully transparent material, we need to set the color to white. Black means no refractions. We can also control refraction glossiness here. and IR value can be changed if needed as well. The same for reflection IR. We can change this value if we need to. We can of course turn on the cold layer in this case as well, and change its parameters. We can create a variety of options. As mentioned before, we can have a separate bump for the base material and another for the cold layer. Let me show you. We can use a noise map as an example. Let's plug it to the diffuse slot as well for a moment, so we can set the correct scale. Okay, that's fine. We can unplug this map from diffuse now. Nice. Okay, now let's turn on the cold layer. So we can see here that we have the rough material and on top of this, perfectly smooth coat. We can also copy the bump here. And now you can see the difference. But we can copy this map and change its scales a bit so you can see how it works when we have two different bumps. Here we go. Awesome. We can nicely see this effect. Okay, now let's turn off the code and let me show you how to create the glass material the same I showed you in Corona. So first of all, we need to change the diffuse color. If we want perfectly sharp reflections, they need roughness equal to 1. Refraction needs to be white as well, and glossiness is set to 0 to have clear glass. But we can control refraction glossiness and reflection roughness if we would like to make it more frosted glass, for instance. And lastly, we have sheen layer. This is what makes fabrics look like fabrics, with a different look at grazing angles, in particular things like velvet. So we don't have to use a follow map now. By increasing the amount of value, we turn on the effect. You can see it here, for instance, or here. We can also increase the roughness of the sheen layer. If we choose velvet from presets, you can notice that they use this effect. We can change the color as well. But let me show you the difference with and without the effect. Big, isn't it? And now roughness. I show you different values. Okay, so we have everything explained. Now I'd like to highlight that we also have more options in maps and the naming is a bit different. So first of all, we have the new maps section for a clear code and sheen layer. The old displacement is this place now. Base bump is our old bump, so it's the bump for the base layer. Now let me show you this in V-Ray. Let's turn on refractions. Let's change the diffuse color to something like this, for instance. Let's make more blurred reflections. If we scroll down, you'll see the sheen parameters there. Similarly, we can change the sheen color and sheen roughness. You can see the changes here. And the same as in Corona, if we choose Velvet from presets, we can see that it uses the sheen layer. And we can, of course, change these settings and adjust to our scene. Now let me show you one last thing in Corona. If you scroll down to Advanced Options, here you can change different options and you can, for example, choose what roughness mode you want to use, roughness or glossiness. So if we change it to glossiness, you can see that it's automatic instead of roughness. And the value will change as well. Before we had 0.6 and now it's 0.4. It's because glossiness value is 1 minus roughness. In case you need to change it, you know how to do this. And that's basically it. So you can see that it's pretty intuitive and we can easily set the same things in both render engines. I advise you to test these different options in the render engine you don't know before we start the next module, where we'll discuss the first scene. In the next lesson, I will explain to you what the certification rules are. See you there!